Well, you can tell we're not in session. When the gavel fell, everybody got quiet. Normally when we do it during session, it doesn't happen that way. Good afternoon, everyone. If y'all will, come on in and get some picky seats and sit down. Welcome to our hearings today. And just as a footnote to a couple of housekeeping items, tomorrow we have had a small schedule change with an additional economist coming. So plan on being here until about 11:45 tomorrow as we wrap up then. But again, welcome to everyone. And I'm going to ask the House Approach Vice Chair, Clay Perkle, if he will, to give a word of thanks, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, bow with me if you will. Dear Heavenly Father, we are deeply thankful for this great state that we are born in or live in, and we make our home now. Lord, we're just in awe of the creation around us, and we thank you for it. Lord, I pray today, right now, that you'll give us wisdom, that we can be good stewards of the taxpayer funds through this appropriation process. Lord, be with the leaders, be with the economists that will speak today. Grant them wisdom. In your name I pray. Amen.
Thank you, sir. One other note of housekeeping. For our House members that are here, Desi is taking roll. And if she has asked that if you are spending the night in Atlanta, please raise your hand so she will know one round trip or 2 round trips. Raise your hand high and keep it high. Okay, that was not a good idea. So if if you will just drop by and see her at some point during the day or tomorrow, rosters will not be turned in until tomorrow. So if you'll just let her know one way or the other, we'd appreciate it. So thank you everyone again for being here. I'm going to ask my counterpart, Chairman Hill, if he's got any comments he'd like to make, and then we'll get rolling.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's great to see everybody this morning, and we appreciate very much you taking your time. I know for a fact that this is a busy time of the year for all of us. This is the time of the year when every group wants to see, and as word of the cuts get out, they're going to want to see even more. So I'd avoid them if I were you. But the state of the economy has really never been more important than it is today, and you know, a couple of years ago, I would run a column on revenues, and I'd list all the states in the Southeast, and Georgia was at the top of the list in revenue growth. Did it for 2 or 3 years in a row. And the fact that the last time I ran that list just a couple of months ago, we're at the bottom of that list in revenue growth, or right near the bottom, which is obviously a change from the way things were. You look around the state and the economy looks really good. There are a lot of very positive things going on. So I guess the thinking that right now it's really important to get our hands around where our state's economy is and where we're headed. And it has real important, very important effects for this coming session. So this 2-day event here is to try to help bring you up to speed as what the economists around are saying about our economy, and hopefully hopefully the news that we get, and hopefully the state of our economy as we see it will be backed up by revenues starting to pick back up as well. But right now, after 2 months, you need to know we're $97 million under budget after 2 months. And that's a pretty sobering thing to be. Now, that's not a trend, that's just 2 months. But These are important sessions that we're having today and tomorrow, and we appreciate very much you taking the time to come and be a part of it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would echo the welcome and some of the reservations as well, and just we've never taken the time to really sit down and kind of get an in-depth look at how and what the process is the governor has to go through in setting the revenue estimate. And so felt like that this would be a good time to bring us together for a couple of days and have a discussion on what the outlooks are. And I think you're going to find that among the group we have today and tomorrow that you're going to see a little bit of a spread among them. I may be wrong, but I think you'll probably see that because that's traditionally what we see in talking to economists. And then help you a little better understand the work that the governor and his folks have to do to come through and to set actually a budget forecast, a revenue forecast for the coming year. And understand that process is beginning about now and trying to predict as much as almost 24 months out as he sets that revenue estimate. So it's not an easy thing to do. It is rather complicated, but Senator Hill and I felt like this would be a good time to kind of broach that subject with y'all, and we will continue to have some other budget discussions as we go on into the fall and get closer to session. So don't think that this is probably going to be the only time that you get invited to Atlanta this fall. We'll probably have you back for some other interesting and fun events. Even the Braves, there is a chance the Braves go to the World Series. So, it might just work out that we're all here while that's going on. But, so let's get down to the business that we're here for. And our first economist we'll be hearing from today is a gentleman that I have known quite a while, someone I have an awful lot of respect for, coming from the agricultural community. I probably saw him speak for the first time probably close to 30 years ago, actually. But Dr. John McKissick is retired from the University of Georgia as a distinguished professor of agricultural marketing. He is the emeritus in that position, or was. I guess if he's retired, he was instead of is. But during his 40-year career at UGA, he served as director of the UGA Center for Agribusiness and Economic Development Extension Program, coordinator of the Department of Agriculture and Applied Economics, the College of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences, and as the founding economist of the Fiscal Analysis Center for the UGA Carl Vinson Institute of Government. His credentials are 1.5 miles long, but all that said, this is a gentleman, as I said, the first time I saw him speak many years ago, he put it in terms I understood, and I've always tried to keep up with him ever since. So, Dr. McKissick, welcome to the podium, and the microphone is on, and thank you for taking time out of retirement to come be with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman England and Chairman Hill, and thank you all the representatives in the audience. It's not a usual place to be, in the audience. Seems like you should be up here, and senators of the Appropriations Committee. It's my pleasure to be with you, and I appreciate from the chairman that fine introduction. I've heard him introduce me other ways, and it didn't sound quite as good, but thank you for that. It is a pleasure to be here with you. I was a little bit intimidated that I was the first speaker up, being the leadoff guy, and I shared that with my wife this morning, and she said, well, just think about it this way. When you get through, you will have been the best speaker they've heard today. That's likely to change about four down the road. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate being here to talk with you about the subject that I've been asked to talk with you about. It's a very daunting task to talk about the industry of agribusiness because the breadth and depth of agriculture in this state, as I'm sure many of you know, runs deep. and wide. And so it's a very difficult challenge to talk about all of these different sectors at one time. But the first thing I was asked to do was put in perspective of our total economy where agriculture and agribusiness fits, and why we say the things that we do about the importance of agribusiness to our economy. So in my understanding, Mr. Chairman, is we're going to have about a 30-minute presentation, and then we'll have questions or 15 minutes or so. So I'll try to honor that, even though I like to usually take questions as I'm going along. But let me go ahead and get to the subject and try to honor your time in this. It's also a challenge, I know, for you all right after lunch to hear from a set of economists. It's not the maybe the most entertaining thing to do. But I will try to keep this as brief as possible and as tight as possible, but yet I wanted to leave you with some information in this presentation that you could go back if you had questions about, and we can fill in the blanks later, or if you had questions, you would have the information in the blanks. So it's not going to be my standard presentation with a lot of charts and graphs, but I am going to start off with this one. This kind of explains or tells you about agriculture in the state. On the left-hand side is a map of the state of Georgia, with the red going to, the dark going to the red, indicating where the major production counties are. Altogether, in a typical year, and I'm going to refer to 2017 because 2018 was not a typical year in the state of Georgia, and we'll talk about some of those issues and some of those challenges. But in 2017, 2016, we produced about, on the farm, so I'm talking about farm level production in different sectors, we produced about $14 billion of goods. So, number one, 14 billion is a big number in our total economy of 1 trillion. But the story doesn't stop there. The story continues with this set of facts. On either side of that farm gate, there are agribusinesses that are directly tied to that $14 billion being produced in the state of Georgia. And I'm talking about Georgia agribusinesses that depend on those farms and those families producing those products. On one side of the farm gate, you have all of the input supplying agribusinesses. It takes feed, fertilizer, it takes credit, it takes financing. It takes a lot of capital in today's agriculture and agribusiness. There's a lot of jobs associated with that input side. If that agricultural production doesn't exist, those jobs and those businesses don't exist. On the other side of the gate, going out the gate of the farm, is all the products that we produce, the fruits, the vegetables, the meat, the milk, the cotton, the peanuts, and we produce about 25 different commodities in the state of Georgia that have a value of $100 million or more per year. So you can see how wide that field is. But on the other side of that fence then is all of those sets of agribusinesses that are tied to primarily processing those goods. If we don't have the cotton, we don't have the cotton ginning and so forth. If we don't have the poultry, we don't have the poultry processing. Now, these sets of businesses are generally included in the in the industry code classifications under manufacturing. Manufacturing is awfully important to the state of Georgia, is it not? Food processing is actually the largest single sector in manufacturing. So we're talking about a set of businesses on both sides of the fence that I think everybody recognizes is awfully important to the state of Georgia. And so what does that result in? That results in a total value of goods and services produced in our economy of $74 to $75 billion each year. Now, 75 billion out of an economy of roughly $1 trillion is the largest share, the largest single share of any one industry in the state of Georgia. So you see why in our models, looking at this linkage of both sides of the equation, we say that agribusiness is, and is generally considered to be, the single largest economic engine in the state. I often look at it this way. If for some reason, policy decisions, regulatory decisions, disasters, if we were to remove that $14 billion of production from our farms, agricultural production, then we would remove that roughly $60 billion of added value, and we would remove a total of 400,000 jobs. So it's very important to the economy of the state of Georgia. And so that was my first job, and you may have questions about some of those numbers. One other thing I have up here as just a point of information, if we look at it across the state, agriculture and directly related agribusinesses, directly related businesses, in two-thirds of our counties in the state of Georgia, that set of businesses is either the single largest part of the county's economy or the second largest part of the county's economy. Two-thirds. You can't talk about development, particularly in rural areas, unless you talk about building on the base of success of agribusiness and maintaining that success. So that's that part of my presentation. Now, I think the more challenging part of the presentation is to try to get into the time frame just a little bit, and I'm just going to touch the high points as I see them, or maybe in some cases the very low points, about where we are in different sectors of agribusiness. Let me start just in a generic term and say agribusiness in general. That $60 billion of added value that we talked about onto the $14 billion of farm production in the state. And I want to do kind of a health check all the way through. I just had my annual health checkup, and the doctor said I needed to do a few things, and there was a little bit of stress there in certain areas. So I want to do a little bit of a health check, since that's on my mind, for each of these sectors, and cover some of what I see as being the big issues, and then come back and try to touch on some of the important areas of concern, some of the good things that are happening in certain sectors of our industry, to try to get at this idea about where we may be in 2020. So first, on the agribusiness side itself, agribusiness is healthy in the state of Georgia. It had been growing in the state of Georgia. If I looked at those stress points for agribusiness in the state, I would say, number one, a limiting factor is obviously labor. And then I would say the number two limiting factor is labor. And the number three limiting factor is labor. We also have some concerns if we're talking about new agribusiness or expansion of agribusiness in the state from some input cost, particularly in the building area. Now let me give you one example of that, one recent example of that. One of our 4 major poultry processors has plans to expand on the East Coast. 2 obvious areas would be North Carolina and Georgia. They recently announced that because they were unable to find an area with at least enough available starting labor to start a new complex which would employ thousands and would have been millions of dollars in investment, they've recently announced that they're not going through with those plans. So that's just one example of expansion in agribusiness that is limited by the supply and availability of labor. Then, of course, you have your other concerns. Transportation. I believe there's a meeting today on transportation and linkage down in Savannah that we have some people at from the Georgia Agribusiness Council. And then, of course, water. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but you'll hear these same themes as I go through and talk about a little more detail about agriculture. But the bottom line, and leading into my next discussion, hopefully brief discussion, is that in looking at agribusiness, because of those things, those linkages that I've just talked about, the health of production agriculture, which all of these businesses, all these sets of businesses are linked directly to, is something you have to talk about. So I'm going to try to go through a little bit of the big issues that affects all of agriculture as I see them, and I've got about 4 issues to talk about, and it affects all of agriculture in one way or another, some sectors more, some sectors less. So let me go through those 4 issues right quick, and then I'll come back and try to do a little bit of an overview by sector. First, if just to kind of set the stage, all of our favorite radio football announcer was Larry Munson, and I think that's the way he started it. Get the picture now? So I want to go back and sort of set the stage for where we were in 2017 and going into 2018. Net farm income in the state of Georgia was under pressure already, just like it was nationally for a whole set of issues, primarily because of a poor price environment. But the great news about Georgia was we had not had the kind of reductions in net farm income that other major ag areas in the country had experienced. And that's primarily because of the set of crops and livestock and poultry that we produce in the state of Georgia. So we headed into 17, 18 in generally good financial shape. And then, of course, along comes Hurricane Michael. And along comes Hurricane Michael at a time where we needed to have some good production. And as Hurricane Michael rolled in. Of course, it was right during peak harvest season for some of our major crops, like cotton, like pecans, are not our major harvesting season. But so, after Hurricane Michael, and during 2018, with the trade skirmishes breaking out across the world, and the impact those things had on particularly our major commodities, we've exited the 2017-18 time period needing more than just a few good crops. We lost producers, but we did not lose nearly as many as I thought we would. A lot of those producers that were in good, solid financial shape going into 2017 and 18 are now pushed more on what I would call the margin. So, the financial margin, where they've got very little leeway to move one way or the other. And then further to kind of set the picture for where we are now, and it's generally true that almost across the board that prices received for most all of our products are at 10-year lows. And how have farmers, of course, survived during this time period? Well, they used all their working capital and they took on additional debt. So our debt to equity ratios are also at a 10-year high. So that's not what you want to see, and you can see why that puts so many of our producers in a cautious area. So then, where are we in 2020? And that's, I'll come back to each one of those sectors quickly to try to give you my ideas about those. Well, I guess I didn't advance that, I'm sorry. Okay. Hurricane Michael. The state of Georgia stepped up big, and agribusiness in this state is much better for it. The $75 million that was funneled through the Georgia Development Authority was quickly put in the hands of almost 280 farms out there in the state. So that was a great accomplishment, I think, for all involved, and agribusiness certainly appreciates what the legislature was able to do, and I'm certain it was in recognition of the things that we've already talked about. So that greatly helped. But we knew, of course, that we needed federal disaster aid. And after a long period of time, $19 billion was finally allocated for disaster aid. Of that, about $3 billion is being dispersed in a process that just began a couple of weeks ago. And it's going through a program that already existed on the federal level. It's the Wildfire Hurricane Disaster Program. It's referred to by its acronym as WHIP, and this iteration is WHIP Plus. We've had this program before. It was used in 2017, and it's been used in the same way before. So $3 billion is going through a formula that was previously established, and applications are being taken now. How much of that $3 billion the state of Georgia and our producers will get, and our agribusinesses will get, we simply don't know. And we won't know when those, or how much that will be, or when it will actually be allocated. We hope before the end of the year. This will be, even though our disasters occurred in 2018, this will make up some of the difference between our losses and our needs in this area, but particularly for cotton and pecans, and even to some extent milk and vegetables. So that's a pretty important program that is underway now, and we hope we'll get a good portion of that. But those $3 billion is going across a lot of states for a lot of different disasters, including the prevented plantings that they had in the upper Midwest from floods. So it probably will not be as much as we had really hoped. Now, there's also a second program that we are hopeful that we will get some money out of, and some large sums of money that remains in that $19 billion, which is going to be allocated to states through block grants. Now, those block grants have not been determined yet, but based on the 2017 block grants that went to states like Florida, we believe that particularly in our fruit and vegetable and some of our products that were not covered in other kinds of aid programs and pecans, that we will maybe get some large chunk of block grants to help support those industries. That would also help support infrastructure, which was not covered by casualty and property insurance. Things like irrigation, greenhouses, and some other things, some other items, some other important production items. But when you add it all up, and the crop insurance program that Senator Chambliss worked so hard to get a good program at the federal level for, is certainly helping a lot of our producers. But when we add all that up, we're still going to be well short of the $2.5 billion. But we do expect that by the end of this year and the first part of 2019, more than a year after our disaster, that those funds should begin to flow, and we'll know more about how much support we have on that side. The second stress factor that's caused a lot of distress in our industry has been the trade situation. And on the trade side, I would first point out that not all of our concerns are based on retaliatory tariffs on our end, but a large portion of the reason we are having difficulty exporting a lot of our goods is simply because of the record strength of the U.S. dollar. We normally think of that, and it is a very good thing in the world economy. But what does it do to the prices of exported products to other countries and the price of our imported products? A higher value dollar relative to a foreign currency, let's say it was a 1-for-1 exchange before the run-up in the dollar, one of a foreign country's government would have bought, or $1 from a foreign country would have bought $1 of goods in America, our exports. But what if their currency depreciates to the point where it's 2 for 1? If there's no change in the price of our product in the U.S., what has the price done in the country that is trying to import our products? It's doubled. So that's one of the strong headwinds that we're dealing with in terms of exports. And I should go back and say, and I removed a graph that was just not working as a background to show you, of course, that one of the few sectors of our economy which consistently runs a positive trade balance is what? It's agriculture. And that had been growing. A lot of our goods are dependent on those exports as a home for those products. So then we add that with the tariffs and countervailing tariffs. You probably hear more about the Chinese tariffs, and I'll mention, that impact more on our goods in Georgia in just a second. But there's also been a lot of multi-country trade pacts that have been negotiated in which we have been absent over the last several years. And in that case, since we are absent from those multilateral trade pacts, which oftentimes includes agricultural trade, we're kind of on the outside looking in to find additional markets for our products when our prices, either through tariffs or through the strong dollar, makes our agricultural products more, and our agribusiness products more expensive in those countries. Longer-term results of this, the short-term results is the price impacts that we have on our products. Longer-term impacts may be shifting to competing countries or stimulating production in competing countries that will then be long-term competitors or as countries source other goods. But we're not talking about the long-term here, and we don't know exactly what will happen on these trade deals. Just recently, within the last couple of days, a new trade pact, a U.S.-Japan trade pact was announced. And that will be good for one of our products that we produce in the state of Georgia, and that would be beef. So we can factor that into the equation, and we hope that these trade problems will be negotiated out soon. It certainly would be helpful for our agricultural economy. Now, in response to the reduction in revenues that agricultural producers have experienced, on the federal level, a USDA ad hoc program was put together to provide trade assistance. It was begun last year in 2018, and the state of Georgia producers received some monies through that program, particularly cotton, some of our row crops, but not as large a chunk to really compensate what we had seen in terms of a reduction in price. This year's program, through the market facilitation program part of the trade assistance package, will provide significant direct funds to producers on a per acre basis to compensate for losses on this side of the market because of trade reduced prices. And that, I would underscore, is going to be significant payments that will be of great assistance to our ag sector, particularly in cotton and peanuts, two of our primary products in the state of Georgia. So, and those funds, and I would also like for you to keep in mind, those funds are going to start rolling in October. And that is for this year's crop, the 2019 year crop. Those payment rates have already been established, and so that will be significant revenue that our producers will receive in the last part of the year. Well, actually, next month. So we've got two things coming up, which keep in mind. We've got significant revenue, we hope will be significant revenue from our disaster aid coming in at the last part of this year, first part of next year. We have significant revenue coming in from the trade assistance package. And then when I get into the commodities, just the sectors, just to give you some highlights, I will mention the direct payments that will also be coming in. That's part of the federal safety net. I just wanted to say, a lot of times people think, well, we don't produce the kind of products in the state of Georgia that are greatly impacted. Now, I've taken the top 5 products that we produce, and this is measured not by farm gate value, but by receipts received for those in total, for those 5 products in the state of Georgia. And then on the first column there, you see the percentage of each of those products in terms of dollar value exported from Georgia products versus dollar value received from Georgia products. And you can see, of course, the top 2, 78% of cotton, 74% of peanuts, our 2 major row crops. It's a pretty significant impact. And those numbers are on the order of $700 million on down to more than $400 million, even though the percentage exported of our poultry industry is only 10% out of the state of Georgia. That's still $500 million of impacted product. So, tremendous impact there. Finally, since this is only one I'm going to spend any more time on, a looming stress, and has been a stress point for all of production agriculture, and as I've already mentioned, for agribusiness as a whole, is on the labor side. And Georgia is now the #1 user in the U.S., has more contracted labor through our guest worker program, referred to as the H-2A program. It's a very costly program. It's a very complicated program to use. There are some rule changes that's been proposed by the Department of Labor, and I believe the comment period just ended, in fact. And I'm sure some of you in the audience commented on that, but this holds some potential to make some much needed changes in this program. But it's also got some major changes that would be extremely detrimental to our use of the H-2A program, and particularly on the costliness of the program. So I would just throw that out labor is a big issue, particularly for fruit and vegetables in our poultry industry, but really across the board. Finally, I had put up water. You all know the situation there. I would just say one thing on water. Water is the single most important competitive advantage that we have in the state of Georgia in producing agricultural products. It is, of course, the lifeblood for our crops and forage crops, and the ability for us to irrigate large acreages of all of our crops in the state of Georgia is one of the reasons that we have more stability in our agricultural revenues and income in the state of Georgia than any of our neighbors in the southeast, which have similar types of agriculture. And you can just track that directly back to irrigation. So we've done a lot of things in this state, and that's been important to those. I'm not going to go through the slides because I've already, exhausted my time. I'll just cover very, very quickly each of these sectors, and they will be in the materials that you all receive and have available to you after this joint session. Let me say, there's some, maybe it sounded like I've painted a very poor picture, but let me go through just a couple of these things that are really important. Poultry is our largest industry, our largest single agribusiness industry in the state. Accounts for about 40% of farm gate value. Poultry producers have had a very good year relative to some of our past years in 2018. And I think there's good reason to believe, if we continue with strong demand for those products, which we have experienced, that 2020 will also be a very good year. I may have misspoken. 2019 has been a very good year for poultry. So there's a bright spot. Egg producers in the state, unfortunately, have had almost a 50% decline in prices. So the egg sector is not really looking as good. And those industries are always dependent on feed prices, and the situation looks much better on that side. On our row crop side, on the two products, peanuts and cotton, and I've really already talked about a lot of the impacts. In your materials, you'll see how much prices have declined. That's market prices. Much of that decline, well, I shouldn't say much, some of that decline in prices will be offset by the safety net programs that are in the Farm Bill. And of course, that is dependent on us having a good harvest season. Another portion of that revenue decline because of prices will be offset by one of the programs that I talked about, the trade assistance package. Now, if you look at market prices versus the cost of production in those crops, in cotton and peanuts, market prices, the revenue you would receive is much below the cost of production. But if things work out like we think they may work out at this point in time, and our projections are correct about some of the payments, the good news is that between those two programs on the federal side, we'll have some producers that will almost cover their total cost of production, including fixed cost, when you add up the total package, the revenue from the market, the revenue from the trade assistance package, and the revenue from the Farm Bill safety net. So there's one that looks bad, and it's not great when you just cover cost, but it's much, much better than it would appear. And the other thing I would say to you all is, there again, that's going to be a lot of revenue from the safety net programs that's going to flow in the last part of this year and on into next year from that side. You know, of course, provided that we have a good harvest and we don't experience anything like the experience that we had last year. Unfortunately, I don't have as good a news for our good friends in the vegetable, fruit, and nut industries. These, in general, not all the products are the same. But vegetables, we produce 33 different vegetables in the state of Georgia in a significant amount, so that's a lot. Vegetables account for about 8% of our farm, a little over 8% of our farm gate production, but they've experienced real problems from growing Mexican production. And if a solution is not found on that side, and that's also true of some of our fruits, particularly like blueberries, if there's not a solution found to that, if there's not a way for our vegetable industries to compete with the ability of our Mexican friends to be able to dump production during our prime market window, then it's hard to see how that industry is going to have a really good long-term future. Labor is also tremendously important to our fruit and vegetable producers, and so everything I said about labor and everything I said about the guest worker program applies there. Peanuts is a little bit different. Of course, peanuts were devastated by Hurricane Michael, and there will be some good amount of funds that will flow through the programs that I've talked about, but these are crops that none of them have a safety net built in, and so the outlook there is, unfortunately, we have given up our title as the #1 pecan producing state in the U.S., and I'm afraid it's going to be that way for a long time because we just simply lost a lot of our production capacity. Ornamental horticulture rounds out the other largest part of our industry, and those ornamental horticulture industry is heavily dependent on the state of the economy. Things can look good on that side for a lot of our producers. Turf grass, we're considered the king state in terms of turf grass production and the varieties that we can produce. Almost every team in the Southeastern Conference plays on Georgia turf, and I remind my friends from Florida of that every day. With that, I've wrapped up. I think I have a little bit of time for questions. Is that correct?
Got a couple of minutes, and Chairman Sam Watson, after that wonderful prediction on fruits and vegetables, is so optimistic at this point. He is texting me saying, "Thank you, Dr. McKissick," and I don't think it was in a gracious way. I think it was like a "Thank you, Dr. McKissick."
Well, Representative Watson will do anything to get out of one of my programs. You know, he just had 3 good reasons, I think, to stay at home. His wife and the twins.
And the twins, that is true.
Just born.
Oh, me. Let me just ask you a real quick question. I think we've got a couple of questions. I'm going to ask everybody to keep it as short as possible. On the actual farm gate value of 14 billion, and the losses from the storm of about 2.5 billion, what do you think the real impact on the 14 is? Because we did the loss assessments and everything after the storm, but then you find things later that kind of go into it, and you don't fully know sometimes until a year or so later what those numbers actually will be. Any guess as to what you think that number may be?
Well, I wouldn't guess on a particular number, but I will say it's north of the 2.5 billion. Our real losses, because when you consider, in some of those, in coming up with those estimates, we did consider lost production down the road. And for instance, in pecan, some of that lost production down the road, if we follow the citrus model from Florida on the block grants, some of that lost production will actually be compensated. But you take pecans, I think we probably underestimated lost production. I know we underestimated lost production from the broiler houses, the growers that we lost during that time period, because that really wasn't even considered in the estimates. And as you say, there are many other things that we find out we lost, many other areas that won't be covered. Some of that we hope will be covered in these in the grants to the state. So I think that's really important that in any way we can support that. It's really important.
Okay, again, y'all keep it real short. We're running close on time. Chairman Martin.
I think my machine must have just bumped the button, Mr. Chairman.
All right, well, that cuts down on that pretty quick. Chair Lady Houston.
Thank you. In regard to fruits and vegetables, my area, I represent a rural area. People have no idea of the kind of pesticides and things people in Mexico are using, and until we do something and to inform the public about that, I don't see how we can compete with the prices of Mexico. And in your clothing, you can look at, if your undershirt came from Vietnam, it's your clothes all over you know where you are. But people have no idea what they're putting in their mouth.
Yeah.
And somehow we've got to come in with some branding if we're going to compete with Mexico.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I would certainly agree with you, and I think that is something our fruit and vegetable industry is looking at, both in the area of consumer education, and that applies up and down all areas in the state. Consumer education and product promotion and branding is awfully important. Of course, our Georgia Grown program is important in that area, but it's important that products that are grown in our general region are seen as fresh and safe as compared to the 2% of products that are actually inspected that come across the border. And then there's a whole other set of issues of actually inspection on the farm.
And with labor too, if they had to pay the price we have to pay for labor,
That's true.
it would be a big difference.
That's true. But I think we could go a long ways in some premium pricing in those areas, consumer education and product promotion.
Okay, one more question. Senator C.
Yeah. Right. I have it in the materials that you'll receive. I had individual slides for each of those areas. But in terms of blueberries, it is the competing production from Mexico primarily, reducing prices, and it is a labor issue. There is simply no way to get around. Consumers want, if they want fresh, good berries, there's no way to mechanically harvest those. And so the labor issue has been a long time issue with blueberries, but those things have combined. We were the number one blueberry state. We had become the number one blueberry producing state. It was really a great success story, and still is from that standpoint, but we had become the number one producing state. Blueberries over the last several years, we've also, just like peaches, and Representative Dickey, I do have a thing in there on peaches to say that peaches was a bright spot. But blueberries have had lots of weather problems over the last number of years that really cut our production, particularly in like 2017. So it's been a combination of those issues, but primarily the competition issue and prices and the labor issue and cost on the labor side.
Okay, we're going to have to cut it off there. Dr. McKissick, thank you so much for being with us. I wish I could say you've painted an optimistic picture, but
I had some in there.
you had some bright spots. You did have some bright spots, but thank you for being with us. All right, ladies and gentlemen, our next presenter will be Alexander Reuter, and I hope I'm getting the last name correct. He is the Senior Advisor in the Community and Economic Development Group at the Federal Reserve Bank here in Atlanta, and specializing in workforce and higher education policy. Again, all the folks we're going to be listening to today have long pedigrees, so I won't go into all of that, but he does hold a PhD from Princeton and an MPP from the Harris School at the University of Chicago, and we're going to forgive him. His bachelor's is from the University of Florida, so, you know, there's charity among us all, and we're going to try to overlook that part. At least you got a sort of reddish tie on today, but the podium is yours, and thank you for being with us.
All right. Thank you very much, Chairman Hill. Thank you, Chairman England. Thank you, everyone, for the invitation. I was thinking about omitting the University of Florida from the biography, but I didn't. I probably shouldn't add that I came here via employment with the University of South Carolina. So it was interesting to hear the story about turf that we just heard. In the previous presentation, we did hear also about some labor supply issues that the agricultural sector is facing. So it's perhaps appropriate that today's presentation from me is going to focus on workforce development and how specifically Atlanta Fed research led by our Director of Research, David Altig, that looks at workforce development as an investment. Okay? And in summary, what you'll see in my talk today is that workforce development is going to be a strong investment for both not just the worker, but for the taxpayer. So hopefully our research can help inform everyone what are the barriers that are preventing workforce development programs from being effective and allowing both the individuals and the taxpayer to get a return. Forgive me before I talk, I do have to just utter my disclaimer here that the views expressed are those of the presenters and do not necessarily reflect the Federal Reserve System or the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. Many of you are perhaps familiar with the Federal Reserve's mandate on stable prices and maximum employment. Now, just as a little bit of background, I want to say that our president, Raphael Bostic, views maximum employment to achieve that goal. We need to think about maximizing economic opportunity, right? And building on that vision, the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta has a new strategic priority. You'll see it highlighted here in number 3. The first two are what you would think of as more typical strategic priorities from an organization: organizational agility, foster payments innovation, which is a key function of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. But you'll notice number 3, advance economic mobility and resilience by cultivating an environment with fewer barriers for all. Okay. So the workforce development research that I'm going to point to today really ties into that idea, right? How do we remove barriers for all and at the same time benefit the individuals and the taxpayer. Again, as background, it's important for workforce development, but also to understand our strategic priority. This map in this green shaded area shows the 6th district of the Federal Reserve Bank. Okay. The next few maps I'm going to show you highlight some statistics that, at least from our perspective, were serious enough to inspire our strategic priority to focus on economic mobility and resilience. Okay. Now, on these maps, the light color represents a worse outcome. Okay, so some people in this room may have seen the work out of Harvard University and Raj Chetty and colleagues that looks at economic mobility. And what you can see here in this lighter area in the 6th district is that children born to low-income parents in the 6th district tend not to do as well as adults as children born in other areas of the country, right? And that's despite the economic dynamism our region has experienced recently, right? So for some reason, economic mobility, that is children moving from low income up the income ladder, is stalling out in the 6th district. We know that there is concentrated poverty as well. Again, these are the light color represents a slightly worse outcome. We see that throughout the South here and into Florida, we have more concentrated adult poverty, right? So when we see this, we think of what workforce development programs can move people out of poverty into economic self-sufficiency, right? Okay. There are exceptions, but another statistic that was troubling for us, at least, is thinking about innovation rates. So this map, also from Raj Chetty and colleagues out of Harvard, shows innovation capacity of children born to low-income parents, right? Again, the lighter color you see here in the South represents less innovation from the children born here when they become adults, right? And the story of this paper is basically that individuals that are raised in environments rich with innovation are more likely to become innovators as adults, right? So again, I think these three figures really highlight that. We've had a lot of, again, economic growth has been incredibly strong, right? We've been, attracting business, and businesses have been hiring individuals, right? We have labor supply shortages, as we just heard in the previous talk. But nevertheless, there are some troubling statistics. Okay. Moving into workforce development specifically, these are results from the 2018 Federal Reserve System Small Business Credit Survey. This is a national survey. What this shows is the percentage of businesses who are reporting that they're having trouble hiring. Okay. These businesses are having trouble hiring for jobs that do not require a bachelor's degree, right? If we looked at the question that asked for difficulty hiring people with a bachelor's degree, we'd see a similar result, right? The bottom line is 72% of small businesses, less than 500 employees, are reporting challenges hiring, right? 34% of those businesses are reporting that it's very difficult, right? So I think this really ties into exactly what the previous presentation was saying about labor supply issues in the agricultural sector. Okay. We can move into some of the reasons why businesses are reporting that. Okay. Number one, too few applicants, right? Not enough people are applying to the jobs. Okay. But there are other reasons, and I've highlighted them in red, that really get fundamentally to workforce development. And I'll define that workforce development for everyone shortly, just so we're all, I'm sure everyone's familiar with it in general, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page. Lack of job-specific skills, education, and experience. Almost 50% of employers say that's the reason why they're struggling to hire. Lack of soft skills, another big reason, right? So lack of soft skills, the ability to show up to work on time, to get along with employees, to communicate effectively. I'm sure many of you have heard this when you've talked to businesses, right? Lack of soft skills. 28%. Lack of basic math, reading, and writing skills. Right? Sometimes we would call that adult education, right? So I highlight these because workforce development programs tend to focus their most essential components on these three items. Getting people the skills that business demand, allowing people to develop the soft skills that will allow them to apply for a job and keep it, and be attractive to employers, And number 3, provide basic adult education, right? So individuals that perhaps don't have a high school education or are, even struggle to with high school level English and writing and math can pass the tests that are necessary to get job training and move into employment. And this data, of course, will be included in the slides that are handed out after the presentation. To sort of just set the definitions correctly, when I say workforce development in the context of today's talk, I mean the following definitions. Workforce development programs are specifically targeted towards roughly 3 goals: enhancing the job skills of individuals in order to allow them to get jobs, right? Businesses tell workforce development organizations, they tell technical colleges that they have specific needs in terms of skills, and the workforce development system devises curriculum that allows individuals to get the skills that they need. Okay? 2, help individuals identify where the jobs are and apply for them. And 3, help them actually with the interview process and with the soft skills that will allow them to actually get jobs. Okay? And we like to say by achieving these 3 goals and allowing someone to move from perhaps unemployment or underemployment to a better job increases economic mobility because it's promoting greater earnings. Okay? The particular workforce development program I want to talk about today, and it's important to note this is a very dominant paradigm. It's called the career pathways approach. Perhaps some people have heard of it. It's dominant nationally. And I want to highlight it because it's very much focused on allowing people to enter work jobs at an entry level, right, that perhaps doesn't pay a very good wage, but relatively quickly move up a career ladder and start to earn more money and fill more positions that businesses demand. So I wanted to provide an example of that today. This is a very common one, and perhaps many of you work with major healthcare employers who have actually implemented this career pathway, is the healthcare services career pathway. Right? And this diagram is from a report published by the Department of Health and Human Services out of Washington, D.C. And what it shows us is an individual can actually become a certified nursing assistant with about 3 to 4 weeks of training. Right? They enter the healthcare sector, filling an in-demand job. Sometimes certified nursing assistants, however, don't pay a very high hourly wage, and it's a very demanding job. Right? So workforce development programs would say, what can we do if someone wants to earn more money to move them up the career ladder? Right? And what this says is, with more education, you could become a licensed practical nurse. That's 1 year of school, right? Begin to earn more money, significantly more money. I'll show you that in a second. And you could even continue farther and become an RN, right? An alternative is to go down for us at least, the left side of the career pathway and get different CNA credentials or other degrees that, again, the returns to education say this will allow you to earn more money. Okay? Now, the question we have to ask is, well, how well is this working in practice? I have to report that a major study recently came out from the Department of Health and Human Services that offered some challenging statistics. Right? So one of the studies looked at about 7,000 women with families that entered the healthcare services career pathway that I just showed you. And of those 7,000, only 3% climbed up that pathway from LPN to LPN or RN. So 3%. Okay? Not a very promising number. A more recent study came out on the same program, slightly modified, and the numbers are a little bit more promising. So looking at a few more career pathways, a few different metrics of progression, about 7% of around 28,000 individuals moved up a career pathway, right? So again, if we're thinking about what will increase people's earnings, what will allow individuals to start paying more taxes, tax revenue, we need to think about what's causing the barrier for these workforce development programs. Okay? The one I want to talk about today deals with a concept called net financial resources. All right, and let me explain. Qualitative work that studies individuals in workforce development that are trying to move up that career pathway, ask them, so why are you failing to move up a career pathway? What is the barrier that you face, right? And financial concerns is a very frequent reason. right? This is, again, qualitative evidence from the Department of Health and Human Services again. We have individuals reporting that, how am I going to pay for student loans? How am I going to manage my day-to-day expenses, right? How am I going to deal with working in an education program that requires me to drop down to part-time work, where I'm not making as much money, and any single financial disturbance to my life could really not only derail me, but derail my children, right? So how do you manage those concerns, okay? And then just commonly a lack of time. How do we structure a lack of time? How do we structure programs so individuals that are very time constrained, how are they able to move up a workforce development career pathway? Okay? Now, originally, I wasn't going to show this way to look at it, but I decided to. The concept I want to talk about is called the benefits cliff. I'm not sure if anyone's ever heard of this concept before, but this is now going to be a priority for this year. The National Conference of State Legislatures has announced that they're going to focus on this issue, so I thought it was appropriate to bring it up in this presentation. Now, what I mean is that a benefits cliff is the idea that the money that you get with gross income is not, of course, what you're going to take home, right? So on this figure, on the x-axis, I have gross employment income for a single mother with 2 children, okay? And on the y-axis, I have what I call annual net resources, right? So for us, that would typically be how much we take home after taxes, right? But for a low-income individual that perhaps relies on various work supports, public benefits, to make ends meet, as that individual earns more money and crosses income eligibility thresholds for programs such as SNAP, such as the EITC, they're going to have to actually begin to lose some of that benefits, right? So let's see how that looks. Okay. Notice that as income goes up, the individual begins to lose some public benefits. So right here we see the loss of SNAP. The individual continues to earn more money, and then we have here, you see these dips are what we call a benefits cliff, right? It's a cliff for obvious reasons, right? It's a decrease in an individual's net resources. And the bottom line here, and this is the intuition people usually want everyone to get when you study benefits cliffs, is that an individual that is going to start paying taxes and losing public benefits, which are necessary to support their work, is about as well off making $55,000 a year as they were making about $23,000 a year. Right? So thinking back to the program I just told you, where only 3% of low-income mothers were able to climb from the CNA position, right? If this is the underlying financial incentive that they face, I think we can understand, at least some people making the decision to not advance at that time. I want to illustrate this before I show you the net returns to government. I want to illustrate this briefly from the worker perspective, and then I'm going to show you how the workforce development programs that we see throughout Georgia and really throughout our district can pay off for the taxpayer. Right? So let's look at it from a very specific case. This is someone that's really modeled like an individual in the healthcare program I showed you from the Department of Health and Human Services. A 25-year-old single mother, 2 children, ages 4 and 6, who is working in a minimum wage job. Okay? She receives a variety of public benefits to support her in her work. Right? And I list them here: food assistance, so SNAP, Medicaid for her children. She'll get some Affordable Care Act subsidies, and she's benefiting from the Earned Income Tax Credit. Okay? This is, by the way, based loosely on a real person that we know. So she decides that she no longer wants to work in the minimum wage job, so she approaches a workforce development program. Again, like the workforce development programs that Georgia technical colleges offer, right? And says, I want to move out of the minimum wage. I want to become a nurse. I want to go on this healthcare career pathway, right? So the question as a counselor you would want to inform Leah is this going to be worth it for you financially? Or exactly how will this decision affect your finances? Okay? This is typically what we would tell someone like Leah, right? This is the type of information that's required that individuals see when they're making decisions about job training programs. The median wage in the occupation. Okay? So it looks pretty good, I think, right? So we say that you start out as a CNA, making $12 an hour. You become an LPN, your actual wage jumps to $20 an hour, right? Then you become an RN, and you're making $33 an hour, right? It's a very clear and financial incentive for anyone to start out at the entry level, take that. I mean, I'm sure we know it's not, to complete an LPN program and an RN program is not trivial, right? It's a year or 2 years of school. It's very rigorous academics, time away from your current job and time away from your family, right? It's a very challenging program. This is the financial picture in her head, okay? We can look at it a slightly different way and say, let's look at that financial incentive over time, okay? Now, what this basically will tell us is that Leah has a small dip in income when she begins to work part-time, right? I mean, to go to school full-time. But over time, I took off RN just for simplicity here. You can see that the benefit to becoming a CNA and an LPN, the green line, is much higher than staying in the minimum wage job, right? So remember, assuming that people make decisions in their education based on how much they're going to earn, this may be the picture in their head when they make that decision, right? Now, what I want to show you then is let's look at how this picture looks in reality when we account for the taxes that Leah will begin to pay more of, and the public benefits that Leah could potentially begin to have to phase out of as she earns more money, okay? And again, we want to provide an accurate picture for someone to make a decision, right? So this is the actual figure. Now you notice it's a little bit more complex than the lines I just showed you, okay? And to help interpret this, I've sort of annotated it in a few different ways. Let's start here at number 1. Notice that as soon as we look at net financial resources, and that's the same figure, remember, with the benefits cliffs that I showed you, we see that from about age 25 to 29, for a minimum wage job, it's even more, that Leah does not make enough money to cover basic expenses. And this is based on some reasonable assumptions about basic expenses, but we can change that in different ways, right? So that's number 1. So again, think about that finding, right? Those qualitative study results about why people are not moving up career pathways, the financial instability aspect. This is potentially one reason. Point 2, low wage growth. So the phasing out of programs such as the EITC, right, which begin to occur as you start to earn more money. You can see that as an LPN and an R and a CNA, from the first few years of employment, the wage growth is very low, right? So rather than earning more money as those previous lines I showed you demonstrate, wages are actually flat, right? So if someone makes that decision thinking they're going to steadily earn more money based on gaining more experience, this shows that may not actually be the case, okay? 3, notice that the gap between CNA and LPN in terms of what the benefit is smaller, right? Because as an LPN, you're earning more money, your taxes will be more, and the benefits you pay are going to be phasing out a little bit more quickly, right? So it's going to eat into that incentive that you had to become an LPN, right? So these are, again, I just wanted you to imagine, if you were choosing a college major or choosing a technical degree program, and this is one of the things we're struggling with, and you walk into your job training center with this image in your mind, and you feel confident with this image, and this is the reality you experience after you invested in an education program, right? That's a challenge. That's a challenge, and I think one of the key goals of our research is try to help inform both policymakers and individuals more about what these charts actually look like for people. Okay? We can summarize that chart in this simple bar graph, and I think you can identify where the barriers are. And these are the exact periods, roughly, that HHS study demonstrated. As a CNA, both in the short term, medium term, and long term, you're better off becoming a CNA than staying in your minimum wage job. But we can see where the bottlenecks are, and it's these very short-term incentives to become an LPN and an RN, right? And the reason is, it has to do, as I said, with the benefits loss, the taxes paid, and then typically you're going to have to move out of your full-time work to go to school. So how do we help the low-income worker overcome these barriers? And this is the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta research on this topic, this is the main point of the talk on this slide, is that if we craft the workforce development programs that allow people to overcome those hurdles, right, that real short-term hurdle, the taxpayer can gain. Okay? So what we see here is the net public savings to government from successful workforce development programs at the 3-year, the 9-year, and the lifetime perspective, discounted present value. So what this tells us is from going from a concessions to a CNA over the lifetime is roughly going to save the taxpayer about $90,000. That's discounted value. Going from a CNA to an LPN lifetime, about an additional $120,000 additional. Going from an LPN to an RN, an additional approximately $120,000. So a workforce development program that does what that career pathway that I showed you initially actually promises to do can generate significant returns in taxes paid and reduce benefits paid out over the lifetime for a low-income individual. Right? Of course, most of those gains are going to end up going to the federal government because of the benefits programs, but the gains to the state government are certainly not trivial. Right? And it's not just the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta research that demonstrates this. We actually write about a well-known program out of Arkansas that is a career pathways program focused on low-income individuals that did an ROI analysis and comes up with strong results again. So I just point out that this is not at the individual level, but in the aggregate. The workforce development program focused again on targeted industries. You can see that about $917,000 in additional tax revenue when people compare it to a comparison group that did not do this career pathways program, right? And this is with about 1,500 individuals, right? About $4 million in public assistance savings from a career pathways program. And that's on a program cost only about $1,100 per person. Right? So relative to the savings that the taxpayer gains from the workforce development program, these per person costs are quite small. And at least this impact study was an independent impact study, reports that for each dollar that the taxpayer spends, $1.79 in addition will be gained to the taxpayer. Right? So those are significant returns that are available to the workforce development programs. This is what I want to kind of conclude with, and there's more in the slides about different policy options that are available for these different both career pathways programs and this idea of the benefits cliff. But I want to point out that the National Conference of State Legislatures just released this report on the issue itself. And what makes the report so strong is it goes through what various states are doing to make that financial path more predictable for individuals like Leah. Right? And it's a fantastic report. It talks about programs like asset limits, changing income disregards, alignment of rules across programs. And in fact, that turns out to be quite a challenge, is that when you're a low-income individual trying to navigate that complex period when you're in school, you're trying to juggle potentially 5, 6 different programs that are administered by different agencies, different counselors, different caseworkers, and it can be overwhelming and perhaps overly complex. Right? So some states are aligning those programs to make the process much more smooth and more predictable for a low-income worker. Okay? So I highly recommend this report from the National Conference of State Legislatures for both policy perspective and thinking through how it could truly help the workers' perspective as well. I'm going to skip through some of those slides that talk about how some of those policy changes would look in practice. They're going to be in, I will distribute to those slides, and you'll see some of our Atlanta Fed simulations on policy so you can get a better sense on how it would impact both the worker and the state and federal budget. I just want to conclude by saying that our website offers quite a bit of resources on both these topics: workforce development, its impact on net revenues to government, and its value as an investment. Right, you can see these. We have a webpage called Advancing Careers for Low-Income Families that details some of the research that I just showed you this afternoon. We have a Center for Workforce and Economic Opportunity that collects research from around the country on best practices in workforce development and identifying what programs are most effective, meaning those programs will be most effective at generating increased revenue for the taxpayer. And then finally, we have a great resource online at www.investinwork.org, which allows you to download actually 3 free books if you want more reading material, that can inform you about really every aspect of workforce development policy that there is. It's a very comprehensive resource. And again, I think our goal at the Atlanta Fed is to inform about what the evidence says and what works and what doesn't, right? And the combination of these resources, you will be able to find answers to those questions. Okay? So to conclude, let me just say that workforce development programs that are targeted to low-income workers, a key challenge, again, is helping people as they enroll in school get through that very difficult period when they're juggling a lot of financial challenges that prevent them from actually completing their programs and moving up a career path, right? Alignment of programs, some of the policies that you see in that National Conference of State Legislatures report can help us learn how to structure those programs so they're successful. Thank you.
Okay, let you catch your breath for just a second. On the programs, can you go back one slide? So on TANF, SNAP, ENT, WIOA, those kind of things, do you know of any states that have looked at doing some type of a waiver with those programs to allow for a tapering of the benefits as the income level continues to go up, so you don't reach that cliff, and when the person receiving the benefit winds up, for lack of a better term, weaning off, that they're at least as good as they're winding up at even or maybe a little bit better.
That's right. Yeah, that's actually a priority of ours, to find those examples and promote those programs. So there have been pilot studies, so very small scale in Florida, that have looked at smoothing out the child care cliff. And I can provide some more information for everyone to talk about those programs. But then a program we've been looking closely at in Mississippi deals with TANF. And what Mississippi does is they provide, after an individual loses basic assistance eligibility, they're eligible for almost up to 2 years of TANF child care assistance, where income is not counted, right? So they actually smooth out that support over 2 years to really intentionally to allow an individual to have a more seamless financial transition into employment.
Thank you. I know it's something that several of us have been talking about. I didn't know if you knew of anybody that had done that or not. So thank you, Senator C.
Respond briefly. I mean, I think you're exactly right. And I think, those qualitative results I show support your comment. You can imagine being in that healthcare training program with only the 3% success. The interviews they did said that one small financial, my car breaks down, or I'm going to have to drop out of the training program, right? So, okay. Yeah. It's something we've decided to prioritize in this research, making it a financial education component as much as a career choice component.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Reuter. I just want to tell Senator C. I used to save until about 18 years ago when I got elected, but that was another day. Yes, I did. Dr. Reuter, your presentation was very interesting. I just had something I needed clarification on. When you talked about there were lists early in your presentation, some of the deterrents to hiring. And I noticed on one, it said that 20% of the reason was failing the drug test. And I didn't know whether that was a national study or not, but it went back off. But in my district, I just had the occasion recently to do something. The biggest single gripe I've heard for several years now is the biggest problem is failing the drug test, not 20%, a whole lot more than the 20%. Can you elaborate on that some?
I can, yeah. So this this statistic that we see on the screen here is national, and it combines urban and rural, right? So if we subsetted this data in a different way, so for example, looking at urban or rural or at Georgia or at a specific area, these numbers could change considerably, right? So at a national level across industries, this is what we see. In a particular industry, in a particular area, these numbers could vary considerably. And I mean, I think your comments reflect that. Right? Okay.
Okay, Chair Lady Houston.
Just one other comment. Have you thought about trying to work and get the Pell Grant a little easier for people to obtain a Pell Grant? Millions in Georgia we sent back did not use maybe $70 million, and the whole United States, it was a couple of billion, I think, in Pell Grants. And that is something that people could go to technical school on. The money is there, but if you've seen the application, it's just so hard for someone to fill out. And that's one way we're falling down, is to getting people, they would have money to go to school on and wouldn't be without a job because the money's there. They can just fill out the application.
That's right. So in my own work, I have not looked at...
Well, check and see how much was left in Pell Grants unused by state.
Yeah.
There's a website you can go on and give it to you. Thank you.
It's a major issue in workforce development, I will say, though, is figuring out how more people can take advantage of the Pell Grant. There's no doubt about it.
Okay. Chair Lady Ballinger, is that you or is that Speaker Ralston wishing to ask a question?
It's me.
Okay. All right, well, I saw him sneak in, and I knew he was a freshman on the committee, and I'm just a little bit nervous about something he might ask.
It's all right. I'm letting him look on my paper.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you.
Anyway, Dr. Reuter, I just wanted to, are there any statistics? I have a second chance / records restriction bill that I'm currently working on in the House. Are there any, I know that the people with the criminal conviction have an unemployment rate usually of about 6 to 7 times higher than those without a criminal conviction. Are there any statistics on workforce development impact of record restriction bills?
Not that I'm familiar with specifically. I can say that the resources that I link to talk about a lot of different programs for the formerly incarcerated and what works and what does not. If any of those evaluations really look at that particular policy lever, I'm not sure.
Okay.
But I would encourage you to take a look at those resources because it is there's a lot of references.
I will. Thank you.
Okay, let me just make one comment real quick on housekeeping. We only allow members of the committee to ask questions. Everyone is welcome to be here. And if you've got a question and a member of the committee's, either House or Senate, are sitting beside of you, please lean over and see if you can get one of those folks to ask the question for you. But just out of respect for the time of all the members and to make sure we can get as many questions in as we can, we are forced to limit ourselves to members only. Representative Stovall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question, I actually have two questions. What is the starting age group that you all looked at for this particular study? And the second question is, I'm interested in the statistics you've done relating directly to Georgia on how we have been advancing careers with low income.
This particular study looks at someone that was 25 years old, right? And the results will vary considerably with that assumption, I will say, right? So we did a 25 because we were motivated initially by that Department of Health and Human Services study. We wanted to look at, well, what's a typical person in a program like that? Young, single, working mother, right? That's just, of course, one case, though, right? And workforce development programs target a range of people, right? We all know there are youth apprenticeship programs. There are career academies for youth. These results would look a lot different if we modeled it for a different age person, right? So one of our goals is actually to find a variety of interesting cases representing different people of different backgrounds and do the same result, right? So this is one case, 25 years old, right? And the second question is, these numbers that I showed you were for Georgia, right? We don't have results yet, though, hopefully we will soon, that look at actual individuals in Georgia going through these programs so we could report how they are actually faring in these career advancement metrics. However, we do want to undertake that study over the next 12 months to be able to report those results.
Thank you.
Representative Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that presentation, and I have a real simple question. Will this presentation be available to us on the website that you showed us?
We will have it, or it already is posted on the House and Senate Budget Office websites.
Okay, thank you.
So it is available. I didn't mean to jump in there, but that was another one of my housekeeping things I need to announce. So. Okay. Let's see. Senator Tate?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I couldn't get the microphone out. I thank you so much for your presentation. I'm glad the screen is still up. My concern is I did a welfare to work training program many moons ago, 30 years, definitely 30 years ago. All of the things that you have up on the screen were present or were factors that limited my clients from being able to advance. We taught them the soft skills. We worked with them on their math and reading and writing skills. We worked on specific education and experiences. So if it's been this way for 30 years, what are we doing to move people away from this? It shouldn't still be happening after 30 years.
Mm-hmm. What I'll say is there is evidence of success, though, now, right? So the first study I showed you was not particularly evidence of success on that healthcare career pathway program. But some of the resources I referenced, and I'll just tell you, I think there is now a strong body of evidence that supports programs that are working, right? And it typically involves elements such as a combination of the adult basic education, a large number of financial wraparound supports to support someone not only at the beginning, right, but also as they transition into an employment, and then, of course, the employer connection, right? I think over the last 30 years, my reading of the literature is that people have become much more focused on the employer connection. It's always been there, but now programs are very carefully designed with the employers. So the internships, the apprenticeships, they're allowing people to get work experience more quickly. There's still a long way to go. So at the last study I showed you, I think it was 28% of participants progressed in some measure. If you look at it in a certain cut of the data, but there's still progress to be made. I agree. But I think, one other, advance over the last 30 years is the development of more robust methodologies to figure out what's working and what's not. So I think the field's continuing to learn what programs to steer more funds towards.
Okay, y'all, I hate to do this. I'm going to do one more question, then we're going to need to cut it off out of respect for our other presenters' time. The good doc has listed his email address on in the presentation, so I'm sure he'll be glad to answer any other questions via email or catch him right outside the door. Chairman Kirby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You showed several graphs that talked about the 3 years, and even the one on the taxes. Now, I know you said the healthcare pathways maybe not representative of everything, but in that first 3-year period, is that something we need to be looking at more from what we can do with employers to allow them to work with those people to get a 3-year employee that moves them on into that role? Or is that healthcare kind of an outlier that doesn't apply for other industries?
I think the answer is definitely yes, right? So the employer component is actually critical, I think, to identifying what career pathway within an organization, within a sector, will best allow someone to move beyond that 3-year hump. And it's, like someone like me, it's impossible to find that out by looking at the data alone. Like, you really have to ask an employer, well, what are the career pathways that exist in your organization that can help someone like Leah, best smooth out that 3-year dip? So number one, yes, employers, key. Number two, there's just a lot of resources that are actually available right now. Someone mentioned Pell, we mentioned WIOA, WIOA, Workforce and Innovation Opportunity Act. There's a lot of supportive resources available that individuals just may not be utilizing to the full. Right, so I think it's about using resources efficiently, and then working with the employers to structure these career pathways effectively.
Okay. Thank you, sir. We certainly appreciate you bringing your insight and potential solutions as well, and being with us this afternoon. And as we continue on our agenda, I'm going to turn it over to Chairman Hill to introduce our next presenter.
Mr. Pate will come on forward. William Pate. How you doing? Hi. Good to see you. Okay. I guess that answers the question of whether we're going to take a potty break or not, huh? Doorkeepers, if you help get them on out and close the doors, appreciate it.
Cleared the room, and I got good news.
Okay, y'all quieten down. Let's get back on schedule here. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is William Pate, who's president. Doorkeeper, as soon as you can get that door closed, we appreciate it. Buddy. Close the door. Apparently not. Okay. Our next speaker is William Pate, who's president of the Atlanta Convention and Visitors Bureau. He's in charge of maintaining tourism as one of the city's top economic drivers. And of course, we all know how important that is to our state. He's a native of Atlanta, grew up in Decatur, graduated, has 2 degrees from Georgia State. In another life, he was chief marketing officer for Bell South. Mr. Pate, we're glad to have you today, and we're looking forward to what you got to say.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for inviting me to be here, members of the legislature. It's I always love to talk about the great business of hospitality and tourism in our city and across the state. For those of you who are unfamiliar with what the Atlanta Convention and Visitors Bureau does, let me just ground you a little bit. Our job is basically to get more people here tomorrow than were here yesterday. We're all about driving volume, and that comes in tourists, transient business travelers, and conventioneers. And we're looking in every way possible to build that volume. It fills our hotel rooms, and our conventions fill the Georgia World Congress Center, which is another important thing that we do, which is we make sure that we keep the convention center full. We do that by not only booking major conventions, but also major sporting events. And you all are very familiar with the Super Bowl that we had earlier this year, which we've been a part of. And I'm going to talk at the end a little bit about our sports impacts, and what the opportunity is as we move forward. We're primarily funded by the hotel motel tax. About 80% of our funding comes from the hotel motel tax, and about 20% comes from private contributions. The way that works is if we're doing a big marketing program, the aquarium may pay an extra $15 or $20 or $30,000 to be a part of that program. They'll ride on top of that. We have a website that's the most visited website in the industry. We see about 8 million unique visitors a year. One of the interesting things is while that was built for visitors, we always see a big spike on Thursday because the people in Atlanta want to see what's happening in the city on the weekend. So people like the College Football Hall of Fame, the Aquarium, Center for Civil and Human Rights will market on our website to reach their customers. I guess the first question you want to know is, how are we doing? Our business is very, very good. We just got our numbers for 2018. 56 million visitors to Atlanta last year. You might be surprised to know that in terms of people in the United States, traveling in the United States, we're the number 4 destination in the country. So people like to come to Atlanta. Of course, we're a business center, so a lot of those people are coming for business, but people want to come here, and we certainly want to welcome them, and we want to welcome everybody. That 56 million visitors generates $16 billion worth of economic impact across the city, and that's through taxes and purchases, merchandise, hotel stays, restaurants, everything. I like to say that we're kind of the gasoline that runs the engine. Nobody really pays attention to us until we have 2 football games, a concert downtown, and 2 big conventions, and nobody can get on the expressway. Then they think about us, not as positively as we'd like them to. But I always tell people, when you're stuck in traffic, put dollar signs over all those cars and all those people that you see, and you can understand the scale and the impact of our business. Also importantly, we support 300,000 jobs. And it's a point that I think is very important because people where a college education isn't an opportunity for them can have a very successful career in the hospitality industry. And I would venture to say, if I were to ask for a raise of hands, most of you probably had your first job in a restaurant, at a hotel, maybe you worked in an attraction like Six Flags, where you learned customer service and how to transact, how to present yourself, how to dress, how to interact with customers. And so these jobs are very, very important. These people buy electricity, they buy apartments, they rent apartments, they buy houses, they buy cars. They're a very important part of our economic engine. And when we are doing well, and we have good employment in that area, the city does well also. Now you see from this chart, our visitation has really been on a fantastic rise since the bottom of 2009. In fact, we've increased our visitation in the city of Atlanta 60%. But I would also tell you that also models the state of Georgia. The state of Georgia in the last 5 years has added another 12 to 14 million visitors, about a 2.5% increase year over year. So goes Atlanta, so goes the state, and vice versa. Because many people who come to Atlanta, especially if they're tourists and they're on vacation, they've made the trip here, they want to see other parts of the state. And we encourage them to go and see other parts of the state. We've had with the state a joint visitor center at the airport for the last couple of years. We take the state's tourism collateral and we share that with our visitors, because when people have made the expenditure to get here, we want them to come across the state of Georgia. Why is that important to you? Well, last year, our hotel stays generated about $1 billion And the tax on that, the state tax on those hotel stays, was about $40 million. So that goes straight into the state coffers, and that's just the tax on the hotel rooms. It doesn't count everything that happens in restaurants and attractions and things that people go through. So when the city's doing well, it generally helps the entire state. And as we say, we have a saying at our office that rising tide lifts all the boats, and I believe that. When Savannah's doing well, Atlanta's going to do well. When Atlanta's doing well, that's going to overflow to Macon. And that's how this industry works, and that's how we want this industry to work. This will give you a little look ahead as to how our business is going. So I told you that we've had a really good 2018, and we're going to have a fantastic 2019. In fact, it'll be the best year in the city's history. Now, as we've talked to economists in our industry, and I'm sure you all have heard from folks earlier today, and we'll hear tomorrow about the economic situation, we're expecting some softening in the first 2 quarters of 20, followed by an increase in activity in the 3rd and 4th quarter. Now, the good news for us is that we have a lot of activity built into the first and 2nd quarter. As a matter of fact, many of you know we're going to be hosting the NCAA Men's Final Four in April. And so we've got a lot of activity built in the first of the year. We always have a strong back of the year. And so as we look at 2020, we believe that we're going to be flat to up a little bit. So the strength and the growth, we believe, is going to continue. Now, when you look at this chart, let me just explain the 2 points to this. One of the important parts of our business is driving conventions. It drives business at the Georgia World Congress Center, as well as drives it in our hotels. And it's easier for us to get a 60,000 person convention than it is, or more cost efficient than it is for us to find 60,000 unique tourists who haven't been to Atlanta to get them to come here. So we put a lot of our effort on the convention business, and I think that's really played out well. And so to give you some perspective here on this top line, these are the largest conventions that we serve. 5,000 rooms on peak, which is a citywide convention that's going to fill up downtown, Midtown, and Buckhead. And the importance of that for the rest of the metro area is that when conventions are in town or big sporting events, it drives business, transient business, and tourists out to the perimeter and out into the other counties because they can't get a hotel room. When we had the NCAA wanted to come in for a site visit the week before the Super Bowl, and they said, "Can you squeeze us in?" I said, I can find you a hotel room in Carrollton, but that's about the closest I can get you. So, I mean, that's the kind of density that we're able to create. And so when we have these big conventions in town, it really helps everybody. And, of course, it drives a lot of activity at the Georgia World Congress Center. And so in 2009, we had 9 big conventions. Prior to 2014, we would average about 14 major conventions. And then we passed the 1% hotel motel tax. Many of you in this room sponsored that and supported that. And today, we're averaging 20 citywides a year. So you can see as we're in 19, we've got 19. Next year is going to be a blockbuster year. I told you about the economists saying things are going to be slow. Things are going to be pretty good for us around here. We're going to have 22 major conventions in town. 21 right now is just a tad light based on the way we look at the world. But we've still got some time to stick a couple more conventions in there. And so our sales team is working on that. And then as you can see, as we move out, and just to let you know, these numbers right here are conventions that are booked, already have signed contracts. We just haven't turned them positive yet. That's for our sales team and the way they get compensated. And then the light up here are conventions that we're talking to that we're trying to close. We typically close about 50% of those. So as you can see, when you look out, our business looks really, really good. Now, why is that important? The hospitality industry is an early indicator when things get soft. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because what happens when the economy starts to turn? Tourists quit traveling, business people quit going out for business meetings. Instead of a company sending 20 people to a convention, they'll send 15 to a convention. So when we start to see things lighten up, we know the economy is starting to get ready to turn, and we feel like we're on a good road for a long time. This 2,500 on peak is kind of a medium-sized convention, still hosted at the Georgia World Congress Center, but it might not take all of the buildings. This used to average 735,000 room nights. And what we found out in 2014 when we hit 925 is that when we hit that number, everybody in the city does very, very well. And so we set a stretch goal to go from 735 to 925. And what we want to do ultimately is set this as our floor. And as you can see, as we look in the outer years, we're going to be very close, if not above, that goal as we move forward. So what I can tell you is I think our industry is very strong. I think our industry is going to continue to be strong. And I think that's going to really be important for the economy. Many of you are on the board of the Georgia World Congress Center Authority, so you're aware of our work. But for those of you who aren't, we work hand in hand with the Georgia World Congress Center Authority and the staff. We sell together. We service our convention business together. We integrate our strategies together. I go to the Georgia World Congress Center Authority every year, and I lay out our business plan and what we have planned going on, how we're going to promote the center, how we're going to fill the center, how we're going to market together. So we're very close. And I think for those of you who've seen the GWCC financial performance over the last several years, I think what you see is the reflection of this strong business right here. Financially, the Congress Center is doing very well, not only in just conventions and expenditures, but also, they get a portion, 9% of the hotel motel tax as well. One of our great competitive advantages is the way we work together. The way our hotels, even though they compete, our hotels, our convention center, and our CVB work very closely together to get business here. And, those of you who've been here a long time, the business community calls that the Atlanta way. And it really is reflective in our business. Our first goal is to get them to Atlanta. And I tell people we're kind of, if you think about our business, we're kind of like the shopping center. Our job is to get you to the shopping center. Once we got you in the shopping center, then your job is to get the people into your hotel or into your attraction or into your restaurant. And I told you earlier, our job is about volume. And so one of the great competitive advantages that we have is that we work so well together. Visitation, while it drives a lot of top-line revenue, also drives a lot of development. And if you look at what's happened in the city over the last several years, you've really seen that come to life. The zoo just opened its big Savannah expansion here the last couple of weeks. As you know, the aquarium is adding a shark exhibit that's going to open next month. The College Football Hall of Fame, when they were in Notre Dame, they averaged on a really good year about 80,000 people. We do about 300,000 people here in Atlanta. They don't move that business to Atlanta without knowing that they're going to be able to fill it. And so the residual value of having all these people in town is it gives us the opportunity to have more restaurants, attract more attractions, and build things. And so even when you look at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, all the construction dollars and everything that's gone into that, and it's important for the soccer team, it's important for the football team, but it may surprise you to know we put another 60 to 70 events in that stadium when the teams aren't playing. So we're trying to keep that thing very active. So again, whether it's concerts, whether it's festivals, whatever it is, if it's going to bring people to the city, we're supportive of it and we're behind it. When you look at our new hotels, and many of you are probably most familiar with the new Hotel Signia that's going to be built adjacent to Building C at the Georgia World Congress Center, but just on the other side of Mercedes-Benz Stadium is the new Hard Rock Reverb Hotel, another 400 rooms. That's going to fund about 500 jobs The hotel that's being built next to the convention center is going to be about 800 jobs. So when we look at that 300,000, we're going to see that continue to grow. Next year, we're going to add 2,500 hotel rooms in the city of Atlanta. And so as our business, and the good news is our business is accelerating faster than we're putting rooms on the market. And so, again, I think it's going to just continue to pay off. But remember that those hotel rooms and the new restaurants that open downtown, think about those as jobs because they require a lot of people. It's the hospitality industry is a very hands-on, face-to-face business, and it creates jobs for people that need jobs, and that's one of the great things about our industry. The Gulch, which is now Centennial Yards, they've given it a sexier name, but most of you know it as the Gulch. The plans there, new hotel, some nightlife, new restaurants and things. Again, when they're talking about that, one of the first things they do is come over and talk to us and say, what does the future look like here? What do the visitation numbers look like? Because they're not interested in adding new restaurants and hotels and things unless they know we can fill them. And the fact that we can fill them encourages that development and encourages, again, more jobs. And then the airport, we had our board meeting today, and we had John Selden from the Atlanta airport come, and he talked a lot about customer service and the fact that he says we're going to do about 111 million visitors through the airport this year, and we drive a lot of that because a lot of those people are coming here for sporting events. He talked about the Super Bowl and all the traffic that they had, during Super Bowl week. But we get that regularly when we have large conventions in town. And so they've now gone on as you know, those of you who travel, they've gone on an extensive development program. And they finished the canopies. They're working on the walkways. They're working on a hotel down there. And so there's a lot of development that, again, is sort of all encased around our continued drive to get more people here and get to 60 million. I talked briefly about the Georgia World Congress Center. One of the other great competitive advantages that we have in this city is that our state legislature has always been very supportive of the hospitality industry. And the times that we've had to have come and asked you all for your help, you've always stepped forward. We've tried to provide really good business plans. And the latest example of that is the revitalization of the campus of the Georgia World Congress Center. And so let me just take you through a little bit of that. Centennial Olympic Park, as you know, is now completed. That's given us the opportunity to do more concerts, more festivals. All those drive more visitors. And by the way, when we have these big sporting events, as you know, when we have the Super Bowl, we usually have a whole concert series in the park. We have Fan Fest down on the Congress Center campus. And so to have that revitalized park is great. And one of the things they did, that was the suggestion that I provided, is we've now got the Olympic rings and the Olympic torch. And so what happens is, particularly young kids, they come here and they take pictures. They take their selfies of all the Olympic stuff down there, and they post that on their social networks. And guess what? Everybody knows they're in Atlanta. And what we want is everybody to see how great it is to come to Atlanta and what a great time you can have here. And so they've done a fantastic job in the park, and that is completed. The connection of Building B and Building C at the Georgia World Congress Center, which will be completed later this year, is very significant to our business. We're going to have 1 million square feet of contiguous exhibition space. We'll be the 4th or 5th convention center in the country that has that much contiguous space. That's going to give us an opportunity to go after about 60 to 70 additional conventions that have just been too big to fit in the modular setup of the Congress Center. So as good as the business is, and as good as the business is looking forward, we think there's still a lot of incremental opportunity to be captured. And by the way, we've already done a good job booking some business in this connector in the next 4 or 5 years. So we're already starting to see some of the great value in having that connection. And then, of course, the hotel, which is going to be the new Hilton Signia. It's their new convention hotel product. We'll have one of the first ones in the country, and that's going to break ground next year and be completed in 2022. About 1,100 rooms that'll come online. Again, about 800 jobs, if you want to think about it in terms of jobs. And another great incremental opportunity for our business. Because Building C is the farthest building from our hotels and the park. And so when conventions come, they don't like to book Building C, so it's the most underutilized of the 3 buildings. And now that we're going to have a convention headquarters hotel attached to Building C, we think there's an opportunity to put maybe another 3 big conventions a year into the city, which would be about a 10 to 15% increase in what our current run rate is. These are all things that you all have supported and provided the funding for, and we're going to fill them for you. We're going to make sure that that pays off, and that pays off very handsomely for the city as well as the state. Talk a little bit about international travel for those of you who might be interested in that. We see about 1.2 million international visitors that step out of the airport every year. These are our top 5 inbound markets. I've been preaching a lot about China here in the last few years. China will be our #1 inbound market in 2021. And just to frame that up for you, 250 million people in China are going to be in their middle class by 2020. And they want to travel. The way that Chinese sort of show success is traveling and coming back and telling their friends about it. So here we buy cars and we buy houses. Over there, they travel. And only about 3% of the Chinese currently come to the United States. So you think about, you've got this large group of people who are ready, and by the way, 55% of them want to come to the United States. And that's recent. So if you're worried about the trade wars, don't worry about the trade wars. It's not going to affect the tourism business. 55% of them want to come. So you've got this large group that is ready to travel, and you've got only 3% penetration. And a lot of y'all are business people, and you understand that sets up for a really nice business opportunity. And so we want to take advantage of that. And the way we've done that, we've been going over and working with tour operators in China here for the last 10 or 15 years in partnership with the state. 2 years ago, we hosted the United States and China have a tourism summit. And we brought the Chinese tour operators, about 115 tour operators, to Atlanta. Showed them around the city, did tours around the city. And we're going to now, I believe, see a significant bump. We do about 82,000 Chinese visitors today. We'd love to get that to 250,000. Why is that important? Because a visitor from China spends about 7 times what a typical visitor to Atlanta spends. They'll usually spend about $1,000. A visitor from China will spend about $7,000. Literally, we had a group from China one time. We sent them up to North Georgia outlets. They cleaned out a bunch of their stores. And of course, they weren't expecting new inventory for like a week. So now, and that's a true story. And so now we have to let people know, we have to let retailers know when the Chinese are coming here. They've also bought out CNN and done significant damage over at the aquarium in terms of spending. So we get them here, they're going to spend money, and they also stay longer because they've made the trip here, and it's a long flight. And of course, Delta has a direct flight now to Shanghai, which has certainly helped our business. And as I said, it's going to be our #1 outbound market. I want to close by talking a little bit about sports, because there's an opportunity before us, I believe, and we're coming, the Atlanta Sports Council, and we will be supporting them, will be coming to the legislature for some help. The first thing to understand about sporting events, why they're important, not only do they bring a lot of people to town, but they typically happen on the weekends, and they typically happen during holidays. So for instance, the Final Four will be right around Easter as we move forward. So we don't have convention business during that time. So it's incremental to our portfolio to get these big sporting events into town. We're the only city that's hosted the college football championship, the Super Bowl, and next year the men's Final Four back to back to back. So that's a great accomplishment and talks about how great our city is and talks about how great our infrastructure and our stadiums are. And of course, you know, we're also going to be hosting the Major League Baseball All-Star Game in 2021. We also have a plethora of annual events here, the SEC Championship and the Celebration Bowl, which is the HBCU National Championship, the Chick-fil-A Bowl. Don't forget, by the way, this year, 2019, the Chick-fil-A Bowl will be one of the college football semifinal games. And so we'll have all that to look forward to as we get near the end of the year. And so as we look ahead, we think we've got a really good opportunity. It used to be Atlanta used to get like one or two of these big events a decade. Well, if you think about it, of course, FIFA is in 2026. We're one of 20 cities now that's competing for 12 slots to host FIFA, which is very similar to the Olympics and will be very similar impact in the city. So we definitely would love to get that. We think there could potentially be an opportunity to host another college football playoff and maybe another men's Final Four, and maybe even by the end of the decade, we might even have the opportunity to attract another Super Bowl here. So we think there's a lot of business on the horizon. But as you know, that costs, that costs a lot of money to attract those things. And we're just not set up for the funding that we would need for that. And so the Sports Council has been working, and I see Ron Stevens there's a great supporter of our industry, and he's dropped two bills that are, which I had written down here and I forgot, House Bill 730 and House Bill 740. House Bill 730 extends the state forgiveness on tax associated with major sporting events. You all remember we did that for the Super Bowl in 2019. One of the opportunities would be to look maybe to extend that. And then the second thing is to look to create a sports marketing fund whereby the state could participate in bringing the event here. We have the event, you know about the economic impact. That money travels back in and replenishes the fund. Louisiana has this. Texas has this. Florida is looking at this. So a lot of the competitors that we have, particularly in the sports area, are now looking for these sorts of opportunities. And we want to make sure that Georgia gets at least an opportunity to have a real good look at that. So you all will be hearing about that and considering that as we get into the legislature beginning of next year. So I want to thank Ron for his support of that and for helping us with that. So I'll just close by saying our business is very, very good. And it's going to be very, very good for several more years. And so I think you're going to continue to see job growth. You're going to continue to see additional taxes. And you're going to see additional development, because I think there'll be more development as we move forward. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to take any questions anybody has.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pate. Any questions, Mr. Pate? All right, the board is clean, so we thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you for not asking questions.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a 10-minute break, and we'll be right back with Mr. Frank Norton, Jr. in about 10 minutes, please.